This episode is brought to you by Wildgrain. Guys, recently, Jubilee videos have given us some pretty special moments, you know, like we had Ben Shapiro getting served.
I've got a vagina.
I'm not interested in what your genitalia are.
Clearly you are. I mean, it's all over everything you make, buddy. I'm sorry.
Or Charlie Kirk eliciting this reaction from our buddy Naima.
His smile is very creepy. Okay.
Smiling is creepy?
No, your smile specifically.
Got it.
And don't get me wrong, you know, it can feel great to watch these guys get their rocked by a bunch of amped up college students, but the price of this catharsis is, you know, less high level analysis like this.
I do think liberals have an issue with all these school shooters because they are liberals. They're usually transgender and they're always liberal, at least the past 10.
Or take this gem.
And I think we need to go back to shaming fat people. We need to go back to making fun of them. I mean, if I was president, hell, I'd put all of them in a fat concentration camp so they can concentrate on dieting and exercising.
And it's not just that individual bad actors show up and say wild stuff. You know, the channel's conversation starters often seem deliberately designed to aggravate tensions between the two diametrically opposed camps they've invited to, you know, find the middle ground.
Period pain is exaggerated.
Teachers with guns make schools safer.
I believe the earth was created by a higher power.
That last one was from their video, Flat Earthers versus Scientists. You know, the debate that the world really needs right now. And at least by my reading, the mere existence of this video in their Middle Ground series implies that there's a legitimate middle ground to be found between actual scientists and conspiracy theorists that think the world is flat. So what's the goal here? Well, Jubilee claims to believe in the power of empathy for human good and that they aim to inspire people to embrace empathy. Now listen, encouraging empathy is an admirable goal, but I'm not sure if the folks most in need of our collective empathy are those who think that God created Earth as one flat surface, or that fat people don't deserve to exist, or that all school shooters are trans people. So today we're going to talk about how these videos are built upon the problematic and dangerous assumption that within every contentious debate there exists a magical type of middle ground. And that in doing so, they end up validating extreme and hateful positions under the guise of open discourse.
Or the other shooting where Kyle Rittenhouse shot a bunch of people during the 2020 uprisings.
In self-defense.
We see these instances.
And that this all builds towards an ideology in which truth doesn't exist and all we have are people with opinions, some of whom are louder than others.
If you're not trans, don't talk about it. It's not your business. If you were a cisgender person, stay out of it.
Don't talk about guns.
We are not on that subject. Yeah, we're not talking about guns.
Okay, before we get into it, I wanted to tell you that the holiday season is here. And so it's time for you and me to start baking delicious homemade favorites with our family and friends. And Wildgrain is here to make you look like a baking expert without all the stress. Now, if you are not familiar with Wildgrain, it's the first Bake from Frozen subscription box for artisanal breads, pastries, and pastas. Wildgrain's boxes are fully customizable to your taste and dietary restrictions. In addition to their classic variety box, they recently launched a new gluten-free box and a plant-based box that's 100% vegan. Best of all, they take the hassle out of baking since all items bake from frozen in 25 minutes or less with no mess or cleanup. In my Wildgrain box, I got a sourdough loaf, tonarelli pasta, pumpkin biscuits, ciabatta rolls, giant snickerdoodles, mini waffles, and croissants. My favorite was the croissants. You know, I like to read a lot of French philosophy, so now I can read some French philosophy, have a croissant and a coffee, and just imagine I'm a dark Parisian thinker. And all the goodies in my Wildgrain box were top-notch and super fresh. And because everything was so quick and easy to make, with my next box, I know I am so covered for bringing the dessert to holiday dinner with my in-laws. They're gonna be so impressed with me, and that's what it's all about. So impress your guests with minimal effort this holiday season. Wildgrain is offering our listeners $30 off the first box, plus you get a free item in every box when you go to wildgrain.com/wisecrack. You heard me, you can get $30 off your first customized box when you go to wildgrain.com/wisecrack, or you can use promo code wisecrack at checkout. Now let's get back to the show. Okay, so one of the first things that jump out at me about these videos is that they presuppose an objective middle ground in which the correct opinions are always found lurking somewhere in between extremes. And we especially see this in their series Middle Ground, which just literalizes this ethos. This implies that if we all just got together and shared our views, eventually we'd realize that there's some sort of truth that exists in between all of our varied opinions. So, if a group of immunologists and a group of anti-vaxxers all get together to hash it out, they'd arrive at the middle ground that vaccines are only sort of modifying your DNA to turn you into a super soldier for George Soros. Or, if gay people sat down with advocates for conversion therapy, they'd all realize that even though the very premise of conversion therapy implies that being gay is something you should want to convert away from and also has no scientific backing and is dangerous and harmful, maybe, just maybe, sometimes we can have a little bit of conversion therapy as a treat. Now, the idea that ethical positions can be found by arriving at some middle ground between extremes is not in itself problematic. Aristotle argued that virtue is a mean or a middle point between two extremes. So, as Aristotle thinks about it, if recklessness is on one end of the extreme and cowardice is another, then courage would be the mean between the two. As a man of extremes, I've only ever been cowardly or reckless in my life. I've never really been courageous. Or if being cheap is one extreme and throwing all your money around is another, then generosity would be a virtuous mean. So we can ask our Jubilee videos, and especially the Middle Ground series, simply just Aristotelian exercises in determining the virtuous means in a variety of modern moral dilemmas. Yeah, not quite, because while Aristotle tried to find the actual extremes of opposing moral positions, sharing none of your money and sharing all of your money, Jubilee capriciously decides where the extremes are based on what's trending. And their curatorial choices drastically affect where the middle ground is found. For example, if they decide that two extremes are fat people are human beings and fat people are disgusting and deserve to die, then the middle ground is something like, fat people they're less human than skinny people, but I guess we'll let them live. And while their stated goal is to produce empathy, I'm not sure how watching people get brutally bullied on screen increases the global empathy quotient.
Making fun of Adele for losing weight, but promoting Lizzo for being a fat ass. Unacceptable.
Are a lot of people doing that?
It's almost like it's not really about empathy, But rather than representing actual extremes, what they're usually doing is offering a more moderate, liberal position on one end, stuff like men can be feminist, fat people can be happy, gay people can exist, and then something more extreme or even conspiratorial on the other end.
And ideally, they're not splitting chores, and I don't mean that disrespectfully, but I think that if a woman cannot look up to you in some way, then she cannot respect you. And if she cannot respect you, she cannot love you.
Feminism, ruined masculinity, fat people are immoral slobs, being gay isn't real. This leads to debates where this is how someone responds to an overweight person talking about their mental health.
Boo-hoo, because they're fat.
Boo-hoo, man. There's way worse stuff going out in the world versus
Absolutely.
people saying, oh my God, I'm sad, I'm gonna eat some ice cream. It's like, no, dude, it's like, you're fat, you made that decision, you live in the best country ever. If you live in a civilized first world country where you have electricity, internet power, etc., you deserve to be bullied. It's ridiculous to me that we have all these fat people running around, meanwhile people are being bombed in Gaza.
Yeah, moments later, the eloquent gentleman offers his solution for obesity.
No, we need to bring shaming back.
Okay.
We need to bring shaming back in so many other regards besides obesity. We need to do it with sluts. We need to shame fat people. We need to shame everybody when they fuck up.
And in case you're thinking, well, it's not their fault that this guy said all the dumb stuff. Well, it kind of is, as it's not just some guy off the street. This is the host of a very popular and wildly misogynistic Manosphere podcast that was previously banned and demonetized on YouTube for hate speech. We only get demonetized for 9/11 jokes. He also wrote a book titled Why Women Deserve Less, because that's a real thing. He opened a Word doc or a Google doc or an Apple Pages file, and at the top typed, Why Women Deserve Less. And he looked at it and he thought, this is a great title for a great book that I'm about to write as a human being in the 2020s. Great guy. So, why does his perspective on obesity deserve a platform? Well, presumably because it attracts a lot of clicks. In another video, listen to what someone says about Palestinian children being put in jail for throwing rocks at Israeli tanks.
They're murderers. If you throw a rock, you're a terrorist.
And in a recent video where Democrats and Republicans argue about the 2024 election, a guy who looks like a failed white rapper from Tampa has this to say about women's reproductive rights.
Really what it comes down to is a woman wanting to get out of not being accountable for her actions.
Let me know in the comments what his rap name should be. Also, let me just note that I'm filming this on November 6th, 2024. So the white rapper guy, he won. He got what he wanted. Yay for you, guy whose rap name is hopefully living in the comments right now. In all of these cases, folks who are largely already occupying a centrist position debate against folks on the far right of the mainstream discourse. And this means that the best case scenario is a middle ground somewhere between centrism and the fringe right. Now, of course, Jubilee isn't reinventing the wheel. This approach plays in to a larger political fantasy where there's a magical middle ground in which universal ideals bring us all together. That's why we had shows like CNN's infamous Crossfire, which was basically canceled due to one spicy Jon Stewart appearance.
But the thing is that you're doing theater when you should be doing debate.
We still have shows like NPR's Left, Right, and Center as well, along with a whole host of other public figures who tout liberal centrism as a magical zone of truth. Now, like I mentioned earlier, the channel's newest series, Surrounded, offers a more entertaining and less terrible feeling format where influential right-wing figures like Charlie Kirk and Ben Shapiro get surrounded by a bunch of young folks who take turns standing up for things like women's rights and trans rights and queer rights. But even then, most folks aren't going to walk away feeling deep empathy for Kirk or Shapiro, but rather just glee at seeing them get a taste of their own medicine. And of course, in these cases, no one is clicking to see if Charlie Kirk and, the liberal college students are going to realize their differences don't matter as much as what they have in common. We're just clicking to watch the fireworks. And since I wrote this video, Pete Buttigieg has done an episode of that format, so it's not just weird right-wing guys, it's also guys that were the mayors of small towns in Indiana that ran for president, somehow did pretty well, then got anointed by Obama and Biden to become the Secretary of Transportation, clearly setting them on a path to become a presidential nominee one day, not because people voted for them or liked them, but because the Democratic establishment decided that that's what he should do. I love democracy and I love this country. And one of the things that's so dangerous and even deranged about these videos is that they imply that all of the individuals involved have equally valid opinions and deserve a seat at the table. People who argue that publicly funded healthcare is good are taken as seriously as those who think the earth is flat. Someone arguing that women deserve reproductive rights shares equal stature with someone who argues that men are biologically designed to cheat on their wives.
Men are designed to want to sleep with multiple women.
Fellas, let me know in the comments if that's real. Seemingly contradictory or even mutually incoherent positions are treated as equally deserving of space in high-stakes debates. And this offers legitimacy to a host of ideas that earn their right to be heard merely by being extreme. Emory University professor Tayari Jones has written that the middle is a point equidistant from two poles. That's it. There is nothing inherently virtuous about being neither here nor there. Buried in this is a false equivalency of ideas, what you might call the good people on both sides phenomenon.
But you also had people that were very fine people on both sides.
I can't believe that's our guy again. This false equivalency and forced sense of virtue permeates Jubilee videos. And the perspectives shown are further legitimized by the feeling that we're watching people with some level of expertise talk about these important issues. And in fairness, sometimes that's the case, but more often than not, they're just people with opinions that they want people to hear. More cynically, this means they're often grifters and hucksters. Because what matters in Jubilee land is certainly not expertise.
Men don't have the balls anymore to just stand up and be a man, be dangerous.
A professional truth seeker who's just asking questions has as much right to talk about scientific knowledge as an actual scientist.
We're all familiar with the Earthrise photo, right? The Earth is rising over the moon. We're all familiar with it. That's NASA. You can go out to NASA's site. You can download the original, right?
I already know what you're going to ask.
So you bring up the luminance on it, and you can see where it's cut out and pasted there.
Now, science, of course, is grounded in a post-Enlightenment logic in which rational methodologies allow us to access knowledge about the functioning and structure of the natural world. But the logic of Jubilee implies that scientific reasoning is just like
your opinion, man.
And that if this flat earther also has their opinion, then all the better for the public discourse, Good people on both sides, right? And when these debates become less about seeking truth and more about expressing opinions that can garner attention, well, you're going to attract a lot of grifters. So when someone says this...
By the way, Planned Parenthood, the founder, she founded it to eliminate the black race.
You're only a few clicks away from figuring out they're just an alt-right grifter who makes their living spouting reactionary talking points, and recently had a podcast debate with another Jubilee star in which she argued that slavery is a matter best left to the states.
So if everyone in Alabama wanted slavery back, you'd be okay with that?
Sure. If everyone in the state wants it, go ahead. What do I give a shit?
After that debate, she called her opponent the F slur. You know, it's hard to not hear the voice of Logan Roy just echoing in your head right here.
But you are not serious people.
Later on in that same video, we get this enlightening exchange.
Guess who was the physicians in Israeli hospitals saving lives? They were the Arab physicians. There's Arabs in the judiciary. There's Arabs in the government. Show me that in Gaza. Show me that in Gaza. Show me that in the West Bank.
Now, lest you think this is a person who's like a scholar on Middle Eastern politics and culture, no, all I had to do is a quick Google to figure out that this person is a Beverly Hills celebrity plastic surgeon with a Netflix reality show. And within the seeming absurdities of the Jubilee universe, I think that we can actually extrapolate a whole theory of truth, or more accurately, a lack thereof. So get ready. I'm basically going to do a philosophy of Jubilee videos from this point on. Okay, so rather than operating within a world where rigorous debate, thoughtful dialogue, and carefully honed perspectives can bring us closer to the truth, these videos take the marketplace of ideas to its logical and clickiest extent.
Middle ground is a social experiment that brings humans with opposing beliefs or experiences together. These discussions may contain viewpoints that are the result of misinformation.
Everything is on offer, and whatever gets the most attention must be true, or at least deserves to be heard. Now, this doesn't encourage thoughtful analysis of important ideas, and it certainly doesn't encourage empathy. You know, it's more like a bat signal for folks who just want to say the wildest imaginable because they know their social media bios are in the description, and that their men's rights podcast or their anti-woke podcast or their debate bro TikTok will get some clicks. Okay, so obviously this sucks. You know, by wearing the guise of empathy and honest and open discourse, which no one would say is bad, Jubilee sort of buttresses itself against criticism, all while creating one of the most popular current platforms for borderline hate speech, conspiratorial nonsense, and lame partisan talking points on both sides.
When you look at the images from January 6th, people in the Capitol, you're saying you believe that hundreds of those people are FBI.
I'm saying that there were, I have reason to believe that there were not only FBI agents, but FBI informants in the crowd. And the FBI, by their own admissions, refused to talk about that. And that is a further proof of
And you're saying they're pretending to be Trump supporters storming the Capitol.
To top it all off, it presents these ideas as serious arguments worth consideration. I mean, like, even look at the studio where they film these things, right? The sort of warehouse vibe and overhead lights sort of signals to you that like something serious is happening here. And in doing all of this, they're also creating a new class of influencer who's using online debate as an empty spectacle to make money and gain clout. And Jubilee continues to play the innocent. You know, they're inviting the same people and giving them a huge platform and then claiming no responsibility when they're using that platform to encourage harm and hate. But if we look at the underlying philosophical assumptions of the whole endeavor, things look even worse. Now, this is where philosopher Alain Badiou, who I pray has never seen a Jubilee video, can be really helpful. In his recent work, he outlined a distinction between the two dominant philosophies of our time, what he calls democratic materialism and materialist dialectics. Now, democratic materialism is what Badiou thinks that most of us take for granted as a kind of natural belief, meaning that even if you've never read a book of philosophy in your life and you've never heard of this guy, that you probably already understand or even practice democratic materialism. Now, the specific belief is that there are only bodies and languages. Now, it's a sort of pragmatic view in which individual human beings communicate and share ideas and culture via language. And these bodies are driven fundamentally by desire and not some broader pursuit for truth. And Badiou sees democratic materialism as pretty similar to postmodernism, a view in which there are no overarching truths but only various narratives that basically compete in the good old marketplace of ideas. And this marketplace element is why the late and great Frederick Jameson famously called it the cultural logic of late capitalism. So basically, we're bodies that use language to express desire for various types of consumption. And Jubilee exemplifies this sort of postmodern democratic materialism, you know, because there's bodies, like the humans that exist inside their soundstage, and then those bodies are using language, the ideas that are being expressed by the bodies in those spaces. These ideas are then, of course, motivated by their desire, and whichever ideas appeal to the baseline desires of the most people wins and is best, or good, or true. I will say, I guess they predicted the election, because in their video on the 2024 election, they had a vote at the end, and Trump won. So, you know, maybe Jubilee knows more than any of us. Badiou associates this with the logic of human rights, in which politics gets reduced to a sort of ethical system in which we all have the right to pursue individual enjoyment however we see fit, as long as it's not directly harming anyone else. And for Badiou, human rights logic basically just confirms the status quo. It says that things are what they are, this is how they're meant to be, so let's make life a little less bad within that context. What's not happening in, the logic of human rights is that we're sort of trying to create a new ethic based on a truth that sort of is different than the status quo. We just have the status quo, we have our bodies, we have our languages. And you can use all of these rights to then say whatever you want in the free space of public debate.
If transgenderism is not a mental illness, then why is the suicide rate in the transgender community 40%?
Against this dominant belief, Badiou offers his own system called materialist dialectics. It differs from democratic materialism by adding 5 words to his initial formulation, which gives us, there are only bodies and languages except that there are truths. Except that there are truths. 5. Put simply, Badiou is saying that we live in a world largely made up of people using language to express various desires, but that there's also a higher order of truth that exists. It's less a postmodern marketplace of ideas and something that's more like the world outlined by philosophers from Plato to Descartes to Hegel, in which truth exists and can be known by human beings via various forms of rationality. For Badiou, these truths are then exceptions to what exist, meaning that they interrupt our dominant logic and offer something new that reconfigures the world.
I have infinite respect for moms, but motherhood is hard. It's so hard, it even broke Marie Kondo. Tidying up was her life's work. Then she has kids and was like, F it, living in squalor is fine.
Now, I know that one sounds a little bit grad schooly, but please stay with me here, okay? So let's take hip hop music, right? Because before it existed, it didn't exist. But a group of DJs in the Bronx used turntables in a completely novel way, transforming elements from pre-existing songs into new compositions. Now, this created an exception to existing forms of music and then reconfigured the musical world. Now, initially, hip hop was dismissed by many as not real music, and not a true form of art. But now, it's a dominant form of art and culture that's produced some of the best music of my lifetime. Now, we see something similar in the history of all types of egalitarian movements, where there's people who were once thought like not to exist, whether that be free black people, queer parents, trans people, but then they become exceptions to a previous logic, and by being exempt from that logic, truly exist and change the logic of the situation. And when this happens, the logic of a dominant situation changes via the emergence of a new truth. And these truths are not just matters of opinion. They are ingrained into the political or cultural or social logic of a given situation. This means that you don't get to decide that hip hop doesn't exist, or that there's no queer people in your state, or that trans people are just a movement that we defeated via an election. The point here is that truths happen, and when they do, they shift the logic of the world in which they exist, which means that unless you are Emily from Jubilee, we don't get to debate whether or not slavery should exist. Human equality is simply true. But if Jubilee made a video called Slavery Advocates versus Human Beings, Middle Ground, well, they'd be presupposing a world without this truth, right? A sort of democratic materialism in which there's just bodies and languages, and they're gonna decide if maybe slavery works. Now, in a sense, it could feel less scary to assume that truth doesn't exist, and that we're all just debating personal beliefs in hopes of finding a middle ground, than it would to acknowledge that truth exists, and some positions are really just intellectually invalid and morally unjustifiable.
I have no shame about it. I have a savior complex as an older brother, and I will save you whether you like it or not. So that's just me.
What's even worse, that we would have to acknowledge that we might even hold some of those positions. Convincing myself that if I just sat down face to face with a genocide defender or a racist or a men's rights activist, that we would find middle ground might feel better than facing the reality that maybe these people just suck and are wrong and are operating with really faulty assumptions. Tayari Jones has written about the American myth of the middle ground, and if you would let me do so, I would like to quote her at length. She writes, "The search for the middle is rooted in conflict avoidance and denial. For many Americans, it is painful to understand that there are citizens of our community who are deeply racist, sexist, homophobic, and xenophobic. Certainly, they reason, this current moment is somehow a complicated misunderstanding. Perhaps there is some way to look at this, a view from the middle that would allow us to communicate and realize that our national identity is the tie that will bind us comfortably and with a bow. The headlines that lament a divided America suggest that the fact that we can't all get along is more significant than the issues over which we are sparring. The desire to find meaning behind our divisions and understand why someone might believe something that feels so odious might be getting in the way of facing up to the fact that some people really are, as Jones puts it, deeply racist, sexist, homophobic, and xenophobic. We could also add fatphobic, transphobic, round earth phobic. It's easier to say everyone's views are valid than it is to ask about why our society facilitates some truly and catastrophically wrong and hateful beliefs. You know, inspired by Baju, we might then want to ask if the brave move isn't entering the marketplace of ideas ready to engage in battle, but rather if the real act of intellectual bravery is believing that there is such thing as a truth in the first place. If there is, well, then some ideas don't really need to be debated like that.
Criminals who commit violent felonies don't deserve certain legal rights.
You know what? I'm sorry, I can't do this. I can't do this episode no more. It's not making any sense. The questions just don't make sense to me. I can't really get my point across how I want to. And the questions are kind of like reversed. Like it's like you're asking the question, but you kind of. I can't do it.
In the meantime, be sure to tune in to Jubilee next week, where I'm going to be the featured guest in their video, Surrounded. One mid-level philosopher YouTuber versus 25 old ladies who would love to experience the love of a younger man. So I don't know where that came from. Oh boy. I blame Trump! But in the meantime, please do let us know what you think. If you haven't done it already, please subscribe, ring the bell. If you want to join our Patreon, which we would appreciate, there's information in the description. Most importantly, I just really thank you for spending your time hanging out with us, and I'll see you next week.